Are you hesitant to get into investing in real estate, buy and hold rental property, because you're afraid of bad tenants or less than desirable tenants? I had heard all those horror stories too, so it's something I was really concerned with to try to figure out how I could avoid those bad tenants or those less than desirable tenants. Now that I've been doing this for a while, I have some tips for you to help you avoid bad tenants in your property as well. Hi y'all, thanks so much for stopping back by. If this is your first time here, then welcome. My name is Lori Livers and I am a real estate investor. I got started investing in buy and hold rental properties just a few years ago, and in just under 3 years I was able to create enough cash flow to leave my 9-to-5 behind. And this has been an amazing experience for me because it allows me to live the life I want to live and not the life I thought I had to live because it was just good enough. And I want everybody to know that if I can do it, you can do it too. This video is how to avoid those potentially bad or less than desirable tenants and find a great tenant for your property. This is what all buy and hold investors need from their portfolio. So let's get to it. First of all, what makes a bad tenant? In my mind, the number one thing that makes a bad tenant is somebody who doesn't pay the rent or doesn't pay the rent on time. Another thing that makes a bad tenant is somebody who's going to trash the place. And then the third thing for me that creates a less than desirable tenant is somebody who is calling me all the time with issues that are not really issues at all. So with all that being said, what makes a good tenant? Well, in my world, a good tenant is one that doesn't move around all the time and pays the rent on time. For me, an ideal tenant knows how to take care of the place because they have lived in a property that's similar to mine before. And they know how to take care of the little day-to-day things that can come up that prevent big things from coming up later. And a desirable tenant in my world is somebody who doesn't hesitate to contact me with legitimate concerns before they become big problems. But this person does know how to change a light bulb and knows the difference. So that for me is an ideal tenant. Hit that like button if you can agree that you do not want to be in a lease with a bad tenant. I know I'm not the only one that wants to avoid these types of leases. And when you hit that like button, it lets me know that you get it. I'm not alone in this. Now let's talk about how to eliminate these potentially less than desirable tenants from your tenant selection process. Now the first step in identifying a less than desirable tenant is by really understanding who they are. And whether we like it or not, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So that's what I go with. I make sure I understand that tenant's past behavior. Now, I start my process by running all the legal background checks, credit checks, and income verification checks. And this is important because anybody who has any type of violent felony is automatically eliminated from my selection process. I don't move convicted violent felons into any of my properties. In addition to that, anybody who doesn't meet the minimum income requirements is also automatically eliminated from my process, which leaves us with the credit check. Now, the first thing I check on the credit report is, do the previous addresses listed on the credit report line up with the previous addresses listed in their application? In my experience, if a potential tenant has broken a lease or had considerable issues with the landlord, they will sometimes leave that address off of their application, thinking you're not going to find out about it, because they know it's going to make them look bad, and nobody wants to give you information that they know is going to make them look bad. This is how you can find out that kind of stuff. So if those two things, if the addresses listed on their credit report don't match up with the previous addresses listed on their application, you can decide for yourself if you want to talk to them about it and see what's up, or if you just want to eliminate that potential candidate from your selection process. Now for me, here's the most important thing to understand about a tenant's credit report. Bad credit and bad rental history do not necessarily go hand in hand. I commonly see applications for potential tenants who have really challenged credit but have a perfect rental history. And this is simply because they prioritize paying their rent over their other bills. And this might be okay, and it might not be okay. That's something you have to decide as a landlord. But for me, there is a huge difference between slow pay medical bills, a small credit card balance charge-off, late student loan payments, and something like a collection from a utility company that caused utilities to be disconnected, or even an eviction. Those last two things are nothing like the first three examples in my world. So it's really important to really truly understand the credit situation and understand that a great tenant can have a poor credit score and perfect rental history. But also understand that a less than desirable tenant can have a great credit score and poor rental history. The two are not necessarily related. They're important to understand the entire picture together, but know that they're not necessarily related. They don't necessarily go hand in hand. So one of the most important factors in choosing the best quality, ideal tenant for your property and avoiding that less than ideal tenant for your property is found in just a simple, short and sweet conversation with your potential tenant. Ask your tenant just these 3 questions and then be quiet and let them talk. They will tell you so much more than you would ever think. Ask them, did you always pay your rent on time? If they did and they say yes, then fine. If they say, I do almost always pay my rent on time. One time last summer, I paid my rent late because the transmission went out in my car and I had to get my car fixed so I could keep going back and forth to work. Worked it out with my landlord, but I did pay my rent late that 1 month last summer. That type of transparency and honesty is something that I can appreciate. And it gives you the information you need to decide if you can live with that situation, because now you know your tenant does not have the cash reserves available to them to deal with that type of situation and still be able to get their rent paid on time. Is that something you can live with? If so, then go on and ask the next question. The next question in the process is just to simply ask them, have you always had your security deposit refunded in full? And in my experience in this situation, most applicants will also be incredibly honest about this. Most of them usually have had it refunded in full. But every once in a while you get that person that'll say, no, my security deposit was not refunded in full. My son threw a football in the house and broke his bedroom window, and the landlord replaced the window and deducted that cost from my security deposit. That is a very honest and transparent answer to that type of question. And so now you can make the choice on whether or not you want to deal with that. But one of the most important questions I ask them is, why did you move from place A to B? And then why are you looking to move from place B to my property? And then just be quiet. Let them answer the question, because what they're going to tell you is such valuable information. What you're going to find out is maybe they're recently married and they need a bigger place because now they're trying to house a blended family. Perfectly reasonable. But what you might also hear is that the previous landlord was a slumlord and didn't do anything to take care of the property because they left a light bulb burned out in my kitchen for over 3 weeks. That for me is a red flag, because I'm not a landlord that's going to go replace that light bulb in your kitchen either. And I'm certainly not a slumlord. But in hearing that statement from a tenant, I know that that tenant and I are probably not a good fit for one another. But just be quiet and let them speak. Let them tell you what they have to tell you, and then just sit back and take that information in. You don't need to do anything with it just yet. So once you've talked to your tenant, you've asked them those 3 simple questions, it's time to call up their previous landlords. And I try to get information to contact at least 2 previous landlords. 2 for me, in my experience, has worked out really, really well. And I always ask landlords the same simple 3 questions. I don't want to put them in a situation where they have to elaborate. I don't want to take up a lot of their time. I don't want to sit and talk on the phone because I'm not somebody who likes to talk on the phone. So I just ask them, the first question is, did they pay their rent on time? And if they did, the landlord will tell you, yes, they did. They paid the rent on time. And the landlord might also commonly tell you, yes, they paid on time almost all the time. There was a situation once where they got a little bit behind. They caught back up and we moved on. Everything was fine. Or no. And usually if they never paid their rent on time, the landlord will just say no, and that's that. No further explanation. But that tells you what you need to know. The next question I asked their previous landlord was their security deposit refunded in full? And that one is also a simple yes or no question. Was their security deposit refunded in full? And the most important question I ask any previous landlord is, in knowing this renter and in your experience of having them have leased your property, would you rent to this person again? And I don't ask them to elaborate. That's just a simple yes or no question. But that question for me is an incredibly telling question. That gives you so much information that is really valuable to help you make a good selection for your property. What I'm looking for in these 2 conversations is to make sure more than anything that the information lines up. I'm looking to make sure that tenant told me the same thing that that landlord told me. Regardless of what the details are, in those situations where those things line up, you probably have a really accurate idea of the past behavior of this potential tenant. And like we all know, past behavior is the best predictor we have of future behavior. So I'm looking for information that lines up on both the tenant side and the landlord side. Now, when these things don't line up, that's when you have to make a decision. Do you want to talk to your potential tenant a little bit more about it? Or do you want to eliminate this potential tenant from your selection process and move on? And you'll know when it comes time to make that decision, which way you want to go. Now, if you haven't seen my video about the most common fears new investors come up against when they're thinking about getting started in real estate. I'm going to link that video to the end of this one. I hope you'll watch that one next. I think you'll find it really interesting because there's so many things that we think we need to be afraid of that we really don't need to be afraid of at all. But tell me down in the comments, what would you be most concerned with about choosing renters for your property so that you can try to avoid those bad or less than desirable tenants? In my experience, taking the time up front to really set yourself and your tenant up for long-term success is absolutely worth it, because you want to have a great relationship with your tenant. And sometimes issues are going to come up. That's just part of the deal. But if you do these things up front, you can expect that long-term success. And that's what you really want and need from your investment portfolio. Don't forget, please do hit that like button. It helps me out with the YouTube algorithm like you would not believe. And also hit subscribe, ring the bell so you can be notified of all the new videos coming your way. And we can hang out for a few minutes a couple times a week. Right now, I'm waiting for you over in that video, and I'll see you soon. Until then, bye y'all.